would like to begin by acknowledging that we all live, work, and learn on Aboriginal land. The Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation are the traditional owners of the lands I live, work, and learn from, and want to acknowledge them and to pay my respects to their elders, past and present. Now, a little bit of an introduction. The Narrative Project was initiated by the Australian Psychological Society to capture the voices of psychologists and record their stories for posterity. By building a library of experiences, we bring richness and meaning to our discipline and gain insight into the unique journeys of different psychologists. Our hope is that these stories become the bridge between the history and the present of psychology in Australia, providing context to where we were, where we are, and where we are going. It is exciting to introduce Professor Michael McGartland as our guest today. Michael, thank you for joining us and taking part in this project.
Thank you, Camelia. It's really, it feels really lovely to be invited along, I must say. So thank you.
How many years have you been a psychologist, Michael?
Well, I think it's about 45. I trained in the early to mid 1970s.
Wow,
So
45
it's a long
years.
time.
Yes,
And,
45 years. That's a statement of commitment and dedication to the discipline and profession of psychology. What was your journey in becoming a psychologist, Michael? Tell us a little bit about your training, your thoughts. Which parts did you start and where did you end?
yeah. Can I just say that the 70s was this, when I was thinking about it, it was a really exciting time of sort of great optimism and social justice. And in psychology, that idealism and excitement and opportunity for change was also present. And I was just thinking of a few of the bits that were there at the time. I was so fortunate to be there. Neuropsychology was just starting to emerge with Kevin Walsh. Some educational practices were being rethought. It was the time of the anti-psychiatry movement of R.D. Laing and David Cooper. And that brought into question the reliability and validity of psychiatric diagnoses. Community mental health clinics were just getting going because the institutionalisation was sort of hot on its heels and closing psychiatric hospitals. I'm a clinical and counselling psychologist, and in the early 70s, what the people did who were practicing then was they mainly did formal assessments. They were the sort of diagnostic specialists when the diagnosis was unclear. And over that decade, it moved quite rapidly to doing more and more therapy. And the therapy, traditional psychodynamic formulations, were being augmented with humanistic therapy, sort of Carl Rogers and Fritz Perls was in there. Family therapy was emerging. Behaviour therapy was becoming more widely accepted. And we had the cognitive revolution, so the cognitive behaviour therapy sort of came along too. And sexuality was being openly spoken about, and the work of Masters and Johnson came along. So we actually started looking at the difficulties that some people had with their sexual behaviour. There weren't many choices available. And so I did an honours degree followed by a clinical master's. And like now, clinical psychology was really popular. And so there was 450 students in first year, and the number was limited by the size of the largest lecture theatre there. And it seemed like most people wanted a career in psychology. And then we got selected to go into honours at the end of first year, so it was sort of different to now. And 50 out of the 450 people went on to do honours. And then we had a sort of something that was a little bit unfortunate happened. When the first class of second year, the head of department came in and said, "Look at the person next to you." And I go, "All right, that's what we'll do." And he said, "One of you might be here at the end of the course." And in fact, it was exactly true. 25 people finished. And it did encourage some unhelpful competitive behaviour, but nevertheless, there was lots of cooperation too. So, and then I was lucky enough at the end of fourth year to continue on. Most people left and went to work at the end of fourth year, sometimes at the end of third year. But there were two postgraduate courses available for all of Victoria, one in clinical psychology and there was a Master of Occupational Psychology, which became organisational psychology. And so I was fortunate to do the clinical program, and they only took 7 people every 2 years. It was just sort of, it's just amazing. So that was the formal bit. And then the other bit that happened was Lifeline had just started in Melbourne, and I volunteered early on. And so I stayed there pretty much the whole time of my studies, being a volunteer telephone counsellor and a volunteer trainer. And it was just wonderful because I got to immerse myself in the basics of helpful communication and sort of empathy and genuineness and respect.
Wonderful. So your training, I think the landscape that you're describing sounds absolutely super exciting. I mean, I trained 2 decades after you, and it would have been actually 3 decades, 2.5 decades after that time that you described. And I can still relate to excitement. I remember feeling excitement at the teachers that I had in my programs and knowing that I was citing them in my papers. I mean, it was riveting. Still, I guess if you can tell us a little bit about all that training and all that, the degrees and the pathways that you went to actually qualify as a psychologist, where did that lead you? Where did you go after that?
Yeah. So I worked for 2 years in a community mental health clinic, which had the real attraction for me of having a telephone counselling service attached. So some of my time got spent with that. And I did that for 2 years. And in retrospect, I now realise that I got fairly burnt out because I worked really silly hours and stuff. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And so then I went to university for what was supposed to be 3 years. A little bit of a rest was my thinking at the time, due respects to my academic colleagues. And I ended up staying for 23 years and had a wonderful time. And I wasn't in a psychology department, I was in a public health department. And so I had all this work with colleagues from other disciplines like sort of sociology and anthropology, epidemiology. It was just so exciting to have the chance to contribute to things. And then somehow that memory that I only went there for a little while came along, and while I got really busy, I always kept a clinical practice going, and I couldn't work out why. Why did I do this when I had no time? And I went back to, I got myself seconded to start with, but I went back to mainly clinical practice, and that's what I've been doing for the last 20 years, and it's great.
It sounds fantastic.
Yeah.
It sounds fantastic. And, what you're describing, it's in some ways typical of what many psychologists find. If you look at many of our colleagues and professionals out there, there's a lot of similarity with what you're describing, starting in one sector, then moving into another, and then merging back, but always keeping that connection with clinical practice.
That's right.
So you began in public sector, in academia. Then you merged into private practice and you maintained that throughout, like over 2.5 decades. While working in the public mental health sector, I'm imagining you saw many, many changes during that period.
Oh, yeah.
But you also worked alongside a number of other professionals. Who inspired you, Michael? Who are your mentors?
So this came, well, some of it was during my training. We just had wonderful people who came, like you were saying, Camelia. In first year, just for the year I was there, the first year program, which was sort of pretty busy, like most first year programs, lots of tutorials and things, was coordinated by a chap called Ron Gregg. And Ron was this humanistic group therapist who was most used to working with groups of sort of 8 or 9 or 10 or something like that. And suddenly he's running this big program. And when he gave his group of lectures, somehow it sort of veered into him talking about his clinical experience and clinical practice. And it was just riveting. It was just mesmerising. It was just so wonderful, these things he was talking about. And I'd done physics at the same time. And physics, to sort of be a physicist, which I was wondering about, I had to wait for ages. And here's this man in psychology talking about exactly what I wanted to do. And it was just great. And it kept me going. And he was a lovely, lovely person too. So there was him. Then in the master's course, there's a chap called Ian Campbell that we have an APS prize called after, actually, these days. And Ian had just returned from working with Albert Ellis in New York.
Oh, wow.
And I think this was about the first, certainly amongst the first sort of introduction of cognitive behaviour therapy in Australia. And so we had this and the excitement, and it was new, coupled with the sort of rigour of the scientist part of the scientist practitioner model, which I've sort of always really valued. There's a sort of precision there, a sort of, great detail. And I've really liked that part too, because I think we have to sort of weigh the two of them together. And so I suppose other people around, like I loved Carl Rogers, I still do, I think he's wonderful. And those those anti-psychiatrists, I think back to them, I went and visited them one time on psychiatry, on sabbatical, R.D. Laing and David Cooper. And what they did was they just wanted to listen to the individual. They didn't want to sort of objectify them and look for the differences. They were looking for what was similar about them. And it just brought all this humanity to psychiatric practice, which is certainly what it is now. I very happily go and be a patient myself at the hospital I work at. I think there's fabulous practitioners there. And I should say, I think the other mentors have been sort of my family and my friends, but really importantly, my students and clients. But the students allowed me the opportunity to sort of collect and present my thoughts and sometimes to listen respectfully while I talked about it all. And then the really wonderful times when they challenge me. And I go, oh, okay. And I actually have to re-engage with the issues and get a deeper understanding. And sometimes I didn't know. The best question I ever had, I didn't know the answer. It was wonderful. But I think also that the privilege that people talk about, and I know it sounds a bit cliche, but it's not, of working with our clients.
Yes.
They had the courage to trust. We go on a journey together, and hopefully it's sort of beneficial. But I've learned so much. It's just like in some ways that's maybe where I have learned the most. It's just and all those bits in life. Like I've got a son, and I learned so much being a father, just watching him grow up, and all those practices and all those ideas about child development, which I think are really important in our profession. I could see some of those with him growing up, and in turn, it allowed me to understand other people when they were talking about their lives and what it was like and what did happen and what didn't happen. So it's. I mean, I think we've got inspiration all around us.
That's exactly what I'm hearing from you. This ability to be open to what happens around you, the people that come and go in your life, the people that you interact and you encounter, and to be open to what they bring into that space. Yeah. Whether is it with your students, with your family, or whether it is with your teachers or those that are guiding you, like you mentioned, Ron and Ian, and allowing all of those learnings to inform your own practice, to inform your own development as a practitioner, as a psychologist, yes, as a human, and yes, allowing that to inspire and influence your practice, yes, which sounds amazing. Now, if I can ask you, Michael, to cast your thoughts to your younger self and yes, to kind of try and recall your experiences, your thoughts, your feelings as an early career psychologist, what would you tell your early career self?
I think I'd say something like sort of nurture and value that wonder that was there, that sort of curiosity and energy to explore and question and keep it alive. Because I think as psychologists, we're on about sustainability. It's not and I think there's a real knowledge that we have there when we start that's really precious and valuable, and the danger is we lose some of that. And so holding on to that, not knowing not knowing in general, but we do know so rich and deeply about being human too. So valuing that we bring along with us at the time. I think I remind myself to balance what I'm doing with other activities too, because like I was saying, I think twice burnt out, and I think particularly when we're young, it's so easy to do with our enthusiasm, and we're also keen to care for others that sometimes we can forget a bit about caring for ourselves too. So yes, I think that part's crucial. And I think something about appreciating the absolutely fantastic colleagues that we have. Psychology's got so many wonderful people. They're generous, they've good hearts. And if you don't mind a little story, I was away once with my son and my partner, and we had to share a table with some people and this couple. And anyhow, at the end of the night, it emerged that they were both psychologists. And so we left after and go, wasn't it amazing? How amazing that they were psychologists. And my teenage son, who's very clever, said, "Oh, Dad, it was perfectly obvious. They were nice, they asked lots of questions, and they listened." It is true. I think it's really like that's what our colleagues are like, and they're so supportive, and they've been so wonderful in my times of need, or when I've been shaky, or worrying about an ethical question. And now I still do it. Now I still go and talk to people and get assistance and check in and do all that. We're so fortunate. And I think that the last bit I'd say is keeping up that variety of work. That sort of, for me, was clinical work and education and research, and somehow or other they all inform and enrich each other.
I love what you're describing, Michael, because you're talking of curiosity, wonder, keeping that sense of alive, that sense of things are happening organically, they're moving, it's energy. Knowledge, you also mentioned, and the value of, basically you said knowing in a general sense, but then you said knowing intuitively. That's something that as we grow, as we mature, we become more comfortable in. When we're younger in our early career, I think we're so focused on following whatever we perceive as guides that we need to become a good psychologist and practitioner, that we forget to listen or look inward. So that's a sense of reflection. And the benefit of hindsight, gaining clarity. You mentioned earlier Carl Rogers, and it makes me think of a statement of his, which is the good life is a process, not a state of being. And that's what you're talking about, is that openness to things just coming and going, and you're moving with it accordingly. That's beautiful. Well, that's also making me think of self-reflection and what an incredible tool that is in providing us with insight and learning, contributing to our growth and expansion. What is one lesson you've learned and would like to pass on to a future generation of psychologists?
I think it's about valuing both being a scientist and practitioner, because I think no matter what field we're in, really, we're doing both. And it sort of includes our personal experience and our professional knowledge, just like you've been saying. And I think they both provide the foundations for what we know and what we do. And they're particularly helpful when we get stuck. But they both need to be nurtured too. And and that intuition, because it's funny to talk about intuition, like from this sort of scientist model when you talk about it, but it's sort of this deeply rooted ancient wisdom, the sort of wisdom of the ages that we have. It's been passed down from generation to generation for hundreds of thousands of years, and it's this source of rich and deep knowledge. But it can sort of be hard to access. It can become distorted sometimes. And what we've got is a balance of our practice in psychology, our ethics, our supervision, our continuing professional development, our theories, our checks and balances, and so that we can not only have evidence-based knowledge that come from randomised controlled trials and things like that, but also this intuitive knowledge, and we can keep them balanced. And certainly in some fields of psychology, we're so fortunate because we're actually allowed to sort of dwell in this space. It's really... it's just such a fortunate life to have and a career to have.
Indeed. I love what you're talking about in terms of your thoughts towards the future generations. And I suppose this makes me think clearly about what the Australian Psychological Society really had at the core of it with this narrative project, is to give voice to those that have been through it, to learn from their wisdom, so the future generations can hear what has happened, to see the similarities, to see the differences, to help them shape and become who they're meant to be in this journey.
I think there's pressure from governments and other organisations to have sort of more generic training, a more generic base, and reduce the qualifications required and things. And I think it does take time. And I think that scientific component of the discipline is incredibly important.
That's right. That's right. Look, my last question, it's a small one, but a big one in another sense. What are your hopes for the future of psychology?
Well, I think the big one is probably to continue to value the strengths of our discipline. We've got a long tradition of evidence-based work from that scientist practitioner model from Boulder, Colorado in 1948. And we're great at working with individuals. And I'm hoping that we develop greater confidence in our knowledge and expertise to speak publicly about social structures and social change. because we know about environments. I mean, it's where people live. And we know that some environments and some structures enable people to live better lives than other structures. And we've got particular insights and knowledge that come from thinking about and working with small groups and individuals. And I think taking a stand on social issues, such as the APS has been doing for quite a few years, actually, and some individuals have been doing, I think it's just such a wonderful contribution, not only to our discipline, but I think to our community at large. Expert knowledge is one level of knowledge. And I think we've got a tendency to be overly careful about expressing opinions that aren't backed up with randomised controlled trials and things like that. And sometimes they're just not available. And we have this rich, deep knowledge of our practice. And I think I think we can be a bit bolder sometimes and speak up.
I think you're right. I think that makes me think basically of the psychology of advocacy in a way, because in order to promote the advancement, development, and application and dissemination of psychological knowledge, we need to be better at promoting excellence, innovation in psychological research, education, and practice. So I couldn't agree more. I think acknowledging that expert knowledge is one form of knowledge that should be upheld out there and promoted. It's important. And I mean, look, my view is that we're not doing a bad job already. However, there is room for improvement. I agree with you, Michael. There is room for improvement. Michael, thank you. Great thoughts. And I cannot thank you enough for your time today. Thank you for describing your journey and sharing with us your thoughts on psychology. It's been a privilege having you here. Thanks.
Thank you, Camelia. It was lovely to meet you. And thank you for inviting me.